So the last couple of years, shooting in RAW has become much more normalized. Especially with cameras like the Nikon Z-R, shooting in RAW has become much more accessible. And it seems to me that pretty much everyone is shooting in RAW now. I myself, through most of my career, has been shooting in RAW. I mostly shot with the Ursa Mini Pro 12K. I even shot a feature film called Above the Knee in B-RAW 8K. And I've been really happy with the images I've been getting with RAW, the flexibility in post. But what I didn't like is the hassle that comes with shooting RAW. And the main reason for this are the file sizes. For Above the Knee, we end up filling up 20 terabyte of storage, which we also had to back up. And early on in my YouTube career, I used to shoot with the Ursa Mini Pro 12K, and I remember every time I shot a new YouTube video, I needed to delete all my previous footage because it was filling too much space, and I didn't have the money to buy new hard drives. But that all changed when I bought the Lumix S5. Around 6 months ago, I bought the Lumix S5 used for around $1,000, and I've been using the camera ever since. And what I really love about this camera is the H.264 codec. The camera shoots in H.264 4K 422 10-bit, which are quite small file sizes, and throughout my 6 months of using this camera, I've only used one 2 terabyte SSD hard drive, and I haven't filled it up yet. And I still think the image quality looks really good. I don't think it's that much of a difference between the RAW you're getting from the Ursa Mini Pro 12K. And because of my experiences shooting with the Lumix S5, I want to make the case that RAW is overrated and overused. And I want to make the case that if you're a beginner filmmaker, a hobby filmmaker, a filmmaker who makes content for YouTube or social media, or make low-budget feature films or documentaries, that you don't need RAW. And the first reason for this is the way that we view content. So when you watch something on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, or even Netflix, the image that the viewer is getting is too compressed. That pretty much all the information that you're getting from RAW or from higher resolutions are pretty much gone. So whatever extra information or detail you're getting from RAW are lost when you're showing it to your audience. And as someone who's made feature films that's been shown in cinema, I would argue even in a cinema, you're still losing that information. Most cinemas, at least here in Norway, projects in 2K. So if you're shooting in RAW, or you're shooting in 8K or 12K, and you're exporting for a cinema release, you will still lose all that information. And also when you're exporting for a cinema release, you first need to export in ProRes to then make your cinema package. And also when it comes to TV, of course a lot of them has a resolution of 4K or even 8K, but the industry standard is oftentimes HD. So most of the movies and TV shows that you're watching are usually shown in HD. And I would say that with YouTube that has 4K or 8K, I would say that the 4K that you're getting from YouTube looks much worse than the HD that you're getting from a Blu-ray or when you're watching a ProRes file on your computer. And that's due to all the compression. And with social media and with people watching more and more on their phones, the screens aren't big enough that you need anything more than HD, in my opinion. Which then again means that you're losing a lot of the information that you're getting from RAW. A lot of people would disregard my first argument because that's not what it's about. It's not about getting all the information out there when exporting. It's about having as much information as possible when you're color grading. And I totally understand that sentiment, but I would argue that most of you don't need RAW to color grade properly. As mentioned earlier, pretty much all the content that I put out on YouTube has been shot in H.264 4K 422 10-bit, and I think it holds up amazingly. I have no issue getting the look that I want with the files that I'm getting from the Lumix S5. And I don't think there's that much of a difference between the flexibility of the images that I'm getting from the Lumix S5 compared to the images that I'm getting from the B-RAW from the Ursa Mini Pro 12K. Of course, the image breaks easier when you're shooting in H.264, and you're not able to move around with the colors as much compared to RAW. But I think that as long as you're exposing correctly, you set the right white balance, then you have more than enough information to get the look that you want. And I would argue that when you're color grading, if you think the image breaks too easily, that might be a you problem. It might just be you pushing the colors too much. Because what I see with a lot of YouTube content and social media content is that a lot of the images has way too much contrast and way too much saturation. That might be the reason why they feel like they need RAW. And I would say for a lot of inexperienced filmmakers, that using RAW can be to their detriment. And the reason why I say this is because RAW doesn't have internal noise reduction. And what I see a lot on YouTube and on social media is a lot of grainy, kind of mushy, and a little bit ugly images where the people haven't exposed the raw image correctly, and then they end up having too much noise, but then they don't add any noise reduction. Then the image ends up looking worse than what it would have if they were to use a more compressed format. And now I want to get into the most important reason, especially for me, and that has to do with the physical consequences of shooting in RAW. And what I'm alluding to is the fact that the file sizes are so big compared to H.264 or more compressed codecs that you end up needing to spend a lot more money on hard drives. So for me, the worst thing about RAW are the file sizes, because you end up spending a lot more money on hard drives. And because the codecs are so heavy, you also might need a much better computer to actually handle the files when editing and color grading. So then you need to spend extra money on hard drives. You also need to spend extra money on hardware. And also the type of cards that you need to use to actually record the images are much more expensive compared to when using the Lumix S5, where you only need a cheap SD card. Also, when shooting in RAW, the cameras become much more power hungry, so you need to spend more money on batteries. So the costs just keep growing and growing. And money is one thing. You're free to use as much money that you want. But I do think we're kind of losing the plot a little bit, because I feel like we have the technology and we have the cameras to shoot more than good enough content, to get great images that are 99% there for much less money, with much smaller file sizes, with cameras that are much less battery hungry, that are much cheaper to use. And I just wonder when enough is enough. How much information do we truly need? Because cameras have become so cheap that you don't really need to spend a lot of money to get a good image. But with a lot of these cheap cameras, you end up spending a lot more money on storage or on batteries or on accessories to actually make the camera work, because you need to shoot in RAW to actually make it work, because the file sizes are so big. So while you have a relatively cheap camera, the pipeline becomes so much bigger and much more expensive. Compared to my Lumos S5, which I bought for less than $1,000, I use a $50 SD card and I dump it onto my SSD drive that I bought well over a year ago, that I still haven't filled up, and then I edit it on my $500 MacBook Pro. So with this camera setup, I'm able to keep everything cheap through the whole process. And I think the images holds up really well. I even shot a feature film with this setup. And we shot that with only natural light. We didn't control the light at all. We had no problem with color grading the image. And we had no issues getting the look that we wanted. At no point did we, for example, clip or highlights. And I think compared to my other projects, which were shot on ProRes and in B-RAW, there's obviously a little bit of a difference. But I don't think the difference is big enough, especially for low-budget film production, where the extra money and hassle is worth it. I even saw a Nikon ZR review where they said that I shot about 30 terabytes of footage with the camera, which to me kind of sounds insane. If you have a $2,000 camera and you end up shooting 30 terabytes of footage, then you end up spending a lot more money on storage compared to the camera. Then I don't really see the point in having such a cheap camera. Then to me, you might as well invest in a better, little bit more expensive camera. I think to me, then you're kind of losing the point of buying a cheaper, more budget cinema camera. But that's obviously personal preference. But there's one last thing I want to talk about when it comes to file sizes and hard drives. And that's the environmental issues that comes with shooting with big file sizes. Because if you're shooting 30 terabytes of footage, then you obviously have to store it somewhere. As I said before, you obviously need to spend money on the hard drives. And these hard drives need to be manufactured, and that takes energy. And also if you have hard drives with a lot of space, they also need extra power. So you also end up having to use much more power when shooting in RAW. You need a camera with more batteries that takes more power. You need bigger and more hard drives that also takes power. These hard drives need to be manufactured. Then you'll probably also need a powerful computer that also takes a lot of energy. So I don't really want to be too moralizing when talking about the environmental issues when shooting RAW. But I do think it's important to be mindful of these things when we're making films. Because it is a craft that needs a lot of energy to actually make work. So I think if we find a way of using less energy and still having great image quality and still making great content, then that's a great thing. Another reason why I'm making this video is that with RAW become more and more normalized, I'm afraid that a lot of beginner filmmakers think that they need RAW to actually get good image quality. I don't want beginner filmmakers to get the wrong idea, and I want to make this video to kind of dispute this thought process. So those were kind of my reasons for why RAW is kind of overrated or overused. I do think there's times where RAW is needed or where it's justified. I think if you're doing a $1 million feature film or $10 million feature film or something where you already spent a lot of money on the project, then I think it makes sense to use RAW to make sure that you get the most out of the image and out of the production. And also if you're doing VFX and things like that. So yeah, let me know what you guys think in the comments, and I'll see you guys in the next one.